Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and a very warm welcome to everyone joining us from right around the world. Before we begin our discussion today, I know I speak for all of us when I say how deeply shocked and saddened we all are by the terrible conflict in Ukraine. As a business at Diageo, we're doing everything we can to support our people across the region, and we're also working with the Red Cross and Care International to support the humanitarian effort. While we proceed with our discussion today, our thoughts are very much with everyone affected by this conflict. Undoubtedly, International Women's Day is different this year, yet it remains a moment to come together, recognize the progress that women have made in society, and reflect on how much further we must go to break the bias and ensure women are thriving everywhere. This need to break the bias is what drives us forward at Diageo to create a more inclusive business and society. So turning to this discussion, as you'll have seen, we have a great lineup joining me today, and I'm delighted to welcome, firstly, Hina Nagarajan, the CEO and MD of United Spirits Limited, Diageo's business in India. Emma Walker, our master blender for Johnnie Walker. And finally, our special guest, Adele Onyango, the African media personality and entrepreneur, and also a proud partner with our Guinness and Johnnie Walker brands. A welcome to all three of you. This year's International Women's Day theme is Break the Bias, something we're really passionate about, Diageo. And I'm going to be really excited to hear and learn from our panelists on how they've done just that. We will be taking questions from you, so please do put your questions in the comment box and we'll try to get to as many as we can. It's fantastic already to see how many of you are commenting, and we can see how global this conversation truly is. For me, stepping into my new role in the last few weeks as Chief HR Officer, I'm looking forward to building on the success that Diageo has achieved so far and continuing to drive progressive changes to our ways of working and our policies at Diageo, much like we did with our shared parental leave policy launched in 2019, and also the way that we've been breaking down barriers for women in the workplace and in the communities in which we operate. We really know at Diageo that to be a truly inclusive business, we need to have both ambition and action. And we're going to get to talk about both of those things today. In the last 12 months, we've strengthened our support for employees, whether that's employees experiencing menopausal symptoms through our flexible working policies, and we introduced domestic and family abuse guidelines last year, all of which are about fostering an environment that is truly inclusive and safe for everyone to be at their best. We are proud of our progress, but we know there's so much more to do when it comes to really breaking biases. So let's get into our discussion today. And I'm going to first of all come to you, Hina. You've worked for many multinational companies in senior positions across India, Africa, Asia Pacific, and you are Diageo's first female CEO to lead our USL business in India. So let me start, Hina. It's often thought that biases faced by women in senior roles are a thing of the past. What would you say to that? And is there a time when you've experienced bias on your journey?
Thanks, Louise. Great to be here. And I would just say that while things have changed quite a bit for women at the workplace since I started working, there's still a lot of bias that exists, right? Conversations around let's not recruit young women because they'll get married, have children, cause work disruption, suitability of women in commercial general management roles versus functional roles, women in certain functions like supply, or in industries like ours, Alcobev, right? And I think the age bias is perhaps more significant for women than it is for men. And the glass ceiling has certainly not gone away. I mean, if you look at any list of CEOs, top CEOs in the world, in any country, you will see how small the number of women CEOs is. And I've faced my share of bias as I've progressed in my career. When I was interviewing for my first job, I was told by somebody, you're going to get the job today because you're looking so sexy, right? And then in one of my organizations, I was the odd one out, the only woman on the management team. And I had to work doubly hard, not only to prove myself, but also to stave off double games by my male boss. In one organization, I was passed over for roles because the CEO was looking after his old boys. And then when I wanted to make a transition from general management to, into general management from marketing, I was asked again and again, are you sure you don't want to continue in marketing? Because, there are so many opportunities for women there. And I've been pretty impacted by this when I encountered the biases. In fact, in some instances, I was devastated and I really wanted to quit, give it all up. But two things kept me going. One was that my parents had worked really hard to give me opportunities. I had worked really hard, and I didn't want all this to wash away. And the second thing was that the incredible support of my family, my husband, my children, siblings, and some great mentor supporters who not only believed in me but continuously challenged me to go on, encouraged me to keep going. And I'm so incredibly grateful for that support and belief I have received that I really want to pass it on to others who experience these biases. And that's really why, Louise, I'm so passionate about inclusion and diversity. That's why I joined Diageo. Diageo has a huge focus and commitment to IND. I felt that not only would I thrive as a woman in our company, but I would, have the right environment to pass it on, make a difference. I feel really proud today to be part of Diageo India. We are an organization that has inclusion and diversity at its heart, at the heart of our strategy and mission. And Diageo India has really set several benchmarks with regard to representation of women in our industry. 22% of Diageo India's overall workforce consists of women. We were only 7.5% women in 2015. 4 out of 8 executives are women today. We had 0 a few years ago. And 31% of Diageo India's leadership team today comprises of women. Our goal is to have 50% women in leadership roles by 2025. And being a woman CEO of a beverage alcohol company in India is a great opportunity for me personally to continue to pave the way for more women in our industry and drive change more broadly.
Fantastic, Hina. Thank you so much. And as you've shared there, the bias comes at different stages when we're entering the workplace, when we're moving through. And I love the way you describe the people that can often kind of help us lift up and face into that, but also your level of ambition to really transform the business in India is so inspiring to see. And I know you're making progress, yet I know you will not stop until you've done even more. So thank you so much for kicking us off there, Hina. Adele, I'd love to come to you next. And you're one of Africa's top media personalities and entrepreneurs. You've got 500,000 followers on social media, 2 successful podcasts. And I was explaining to Adele that I got introduced to one of them at the weekend, which was a really enjoyable discovery. You've also been recognized by Facebook as an icon of change and by BBC as one of the world's most inspirational and innovative women. Congratulations on all of that. You've got international recognition through your work to empower women in Africa with the Adele Onyango initiative. Can you tell us a bit about what inspired you to set this up and about the programs you've developed to help bridge the skills and services gap among women?
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here and to just listen to such rich conversations. It's always very inspiring. And so for me, I think I'll start with the umbrella reason as to why I started both the podcast and my initiative. And I think it's because as an African woman and just a woman in general in media, I feel like our stories are not told with in an unbiased lens. There's a lot of censorship. There's a lot of profiling of what a woman should look like, should speak like, or the conversations we should be part of. So that was one of my reasons to branch out and go into launching my own platform and own podcasts. In terms of the Adele Onyango initiative, I had done a lot of work before in a less structured way, talking to young Africans and young Kenyans and just trying to understand some of the pain points that they have in terms of unemployment, in terms of entrepreneurship. And because of my background in always having a bias to kind of uplift women, I'd always make sure that in those forums, there would be more women, both in the audience and also in terms of facilitators. And one of the things that I found is that a lot of women were shying away from the digital space for multiple reasons. Some are cultural reasons, so it was not seen as important for women from different cultures to first and foremost go to school, and then on top of that to learn anything computer or tech related was seen as a waste of time for some cultures. The second thing was that some of these spaces are very violent towards women, and what happens is you see other women getting attacked online and you shy away from it altogether. But the worst result of this that I saw is two things. One, the digital space can really help young African women and women all around the world, honestly, earn a living, get jobs, start their businesses, and get skills. Sometimes even these skills can be gotten for free. And then the second thing is, by them not being in this space, it meant they weren't taking part in conversations that would directly affect them, be it political conversations or conversations on development. And so what we did was come up first and foremost with a job shadow program. And that was to match our youth members who are primarily young women to different professionals in various fields, because we also found out that young women were not getting access to tertiary education, and we didn't want that to lock them out of getting any skills. So they would follow different professionals in different organizations, and after that get certification that would help them, even if they don't have a degree, even if they don't have a diploma, it sets them up for the next job. And some women were actually hired after going through the job shadow program. Some women who were green, not stepped a day in university, were in some organizations left to do the entire payroll after just 2 weeks of being in the job shadow program. Another thing that we found to be very important, especially when the pandemic hit, was to ensure that young women still had access to ways that they could make money. And because we were all locked indoors, one of the ways that we had to exploit was digital. And so we ran a couple of digital workshops just to get women entrepreneurs understanding how to take advantage of the digital space to still run their business, even during the pandemic, which was a time when most women needed that income. And so for me, it's really to say, there's this wonderful thing. It's scary. There are pockets of the internet that are a bit harsh and violent. There's a lot of things we need to do around safety. But it's also a space that women can be part of conversations that directly affect them. And also for those of us in business, I mean, my business sits primarily on a digital space. You can actually earn a living from it. And financial independence is very important for us as women.
Fantastic, Adele. Thank you so much. And I mean, what a bold ambition you've set out. And it just strikes me that as well as getting more women in the conversation, you're also making such a huge contribution to the economic empowerment of women. And I love all of the initiatives that you're driving there. I'm sure we'll come back to a couple more of your perspectives on that. But I'd like to come to Emma next. And Emma, I think we'd join you live in a lab in Menstrie. And we're going to talk now about women in STEM for a moment. So women in science, technology, engineering and maths. And we know in Diageo, this is an area where more action is needed to attract women into roles, especially at the entry level. And last year, Emma became the first woman to take on the coveted role of master blender for our Johnnie Walker whiskey. And we do point out she is no relation to the brand. But Emma, you've been with us since 2008. You've held several roles before becoming the prestigious master blender of Johnnie Walker in 2022. Can you talk to us a bit about the bias that you see in that STEM area and how you've been able to break through to get to where you are today?
I remember the initial bias that you would sometimes pick up on when I was at university or in my early days of work. You know, there'd almost be a shock at people going, "You're a chemist," or "You're in meetings and you'd be expected to sort out the coffees and do a lot of the mental load of work. You were meant to almost nurture others, help them get to the point in their careers that they wanted to get to, as opposed to pushing yourself forward." But I do feel that has changed substantially, especially in Diageo. I think as we're seeing more women leaders in the company, plus also the number of male leaders that are very open to helping everyone, to making sure there's a lot more voices around the table. We're definitely in a really good space. I'm very lucky that I've not actually picked up on any bias in Diageo since I've been here. I've worked with some great mentors such as Jim Beveridge, Maureen Robinson, Paul Lockyer, and a lot of others who've pushed me continually to almost be more involved in things than I probably thought I was able to at that point in time. So I think that's one way that great mentors and great people in STEM and in Diageo can help, is that they can help you to understand your capabilities that you might not quite have picked up on already. So that's been a great thing. As we're moving through, we are seeing a lot more women in different roles across Diageo. So within the whisky team, so the people that would normally be working in the laboratory behind me, we've got a 50-50 gender split, and it's been in that sort of area since I started with Diageo. We've got great female leadership. So Rona Ferns is the whisky team manager. Maureen Robinson just celebrated her 45 years working in whisky and with Diageo last week. So she's a master blender for Buchanan's and also a master of malt for the Singleton brand. Across my time working in Scotch, I've seen a huge increase in the number of people like female engineers, operators, coopers, and that's been a huge push that we've had in the company through our apprentice and training schemes. And that's an advice that I would pass on to people who are interested in the industry. It's a great route into the industry. One of the things I get asked a lot about is, as a female who works in what's perceived as a male-dominated area, how do you feel? How do you challenge the biases? I think that's actually a really interesting way of putting the question. I personally, as I've said, don't feel like I've come up against any biases. But I think in the past there maybe has been biases in how we showcase people working in whisky. I think that's something that Diageo and has done a great job in, as we're showing more and more of the mix of characters and mix of people that create Scotch whisky and work in the industry. And I think that's hugely important. I think it'd be great if we can start to get the media and other people to understand that. So there is a mix of people that are interested in whisky. There are a mix of people that want to drink whisky. So how can we stop some of the challenges that some of our brand ambassadors and other people working in whisky communication come up against? Because I think that is a big point of challenge in a lot of cases.
Fantastic, Emma. Thanks so much. And look, I think you being in the role you're in and some of the other fantastic women you referenced there give certainly hope and inspiration to others that you can break through. And as you say, it's about getting women across all of the key roles. So I love the work that we've been doing in Scotland that I know you've been part of, and building more of that apprentice kind of pipeline of talent into some of our Cooper roles as well. And I think, as you say, everybody has to own confronting and breaking through this bias. Both men and women need to really play their part in that. So we'll come back, I'm sure, to a bit of that theme. But we've talked a bit about our brands, and I'd love to maybe now come to that. We really see in Diageo the role our brands can play in helping to address stereotypes and break bias. And we really want to make sure that we have powerful female role models in our advertising, so in front of the camera, but also we want to use our media spend to challenge stereotypes and celebrate diversity. And Adele, if I can come to you, because we've recently partnered with you on the Guinness brand on a Pan-African campaign that was called Black Shines Brightest. I got goosebumps the first time I saw that piece of campaign work, and I still do now. So Adele, let me come to you. What was it about that campaign that made you want to get involved? And how do you see the importance of brands like Guinness challenging stereotypes and celebrating diversity?
So I think, yes, I still also get goosebumps when I watch that. It's such a nice mix of African creativity and it's wonderful. So on a personal level, as I alluded to earlier on, I was on traditional radio for 10 years. And in that time, there was a specific way things were done in terms of the African stories that were celebrated that I wasn't comfortable with. It was more pop culture and less of young Africans who are doing spectacular things in their fields, who are innovating, who are creating solutions that are good not only for Kenya, but across the continent and across the globe. And I wanted to be able to amplify those African stories. And so that's really what my podcast, Legally Clueless, does. And that was one of the reasons I quit my job to really then go out to where these African stories are happening and record them, amplify them, and so that we can learn about each other, but also just remember how remarkable we are, and allow us to shine. And so for me, that was the intersection with Black Shines Brightest, because here we are celebrating African stories, and here Guinness is also saying that, hey, we need to celebrate the innovative and creative young Black people who normally would not get this amount of shine on them. And I think one reason that this campaign is very important, which is also similar to my podcast, is also something about diversity, but also representation. And it's representation on a number of levels. The first is just the creative field. That's a field that doesn't get as much representation. There's still so much emphasis on taking the quote unquote normal courses or normal journeys in life, and creativity not seen as something so important, something you can build a career around. That's one. And also representation when it comes to the young Black women who are doing remarkable work in the creative industry on the continent. And this is what Black Shines Brightest was doing as well, because there is representation of African women who are in the creative field. Now, the reason this is so important, I'll tell you from just a short story. I recently went to give a talk in a local school here in Nairobi. And I talked about my media journey, being in employment and then branching off to go into business in the media space still for the last 3 years. And after the talk, a young girl came to me and she said, oh, she's going to study something completely different, but her heart is really in studying media. And so I asked her, okay, so why are you, choosing this over the other? And I think I expected to hear something around, oh, my parents would prefer me to study this, or my friends are saying this. And what she said really broke my heart, because she said, because she's fuller figured and she has dark skin, that she was told that is not a space for her in either the creative industry or the media industry. And this is where representation plays its role. And it has to be intentional for all companies that put out any form of visuals, because it's so powerful what you're doing for a young Black girl to see an image and see somebody in the creative fields being celebrated, one, but to see a Black woman being celebrated as well. It does something. It shows that this is a space that even she can take up. It shows that this is not a space that is only for men. For you to actually go down a route, you kind of have to visualize yourself in that space to begin with. And I think for me, that's why it's so important, not only for, say, on my podcast, for me to amplify stories by African women, but also for campaigns such as these to celebrate and include women in their visuals as well. Because it might not seem, conscious for us who probably are older and kind of have our careers kind of laid out for us. But for the younger African girls, they need to see a lot more representation, and they need to see people who look like them, who speak like them, who have names like them in campaigns such as Black Shines Brightest. It really, really drives home the point that this is a space that they too can occupy.
That's amazing, Adele. And as I said, I always loved that piece of ad work. But now that I hear your vision and your ambition for that, makes me even more determined that we amplify that message. And as you say, representation is absolutely at the heart of this, making sure people can see themselves and see that the path ahead for them can be laid out as well. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that piece of work. I'm going to turn now to Hina. And I know in India, the Royal Challenge whiskey has been working really hard to level the playing field in an area where there's a lot of bias, and that's sport. And in particular, in this case, leveling the playing field for women's cricket. Can you tell us a bit more about that campaign, where it came from, and your aspirations for that?
Actually, this is one of my favorites, Louise. We did the Challenge Accepted campaign a couple of years ago during IPL 2019. And the idea was to really to create a movement that called for greater equity for women in the most loved sport in India, cricket, with an idea of a mixed gender match. And the insight was that while cricket is hugely popular in India, it is really gender biased in terms of followership, earnings of players, sponsorships, and so on. The campaign focused on bringing to life the idea of a mixed gender cricket match where perspectives of men's and women's cricket could come together to lift the game and break barriers around gender. And the campaign saw great success, massive amount of conversation on social media during IPL 2019, over 110 million reach, viral conversations amongst cricketers, opinion leaders, even BBC radio talked about it. And what this campaign really did for us was that it showed us the potential of creating equity in culture for all gender, ethnicities, cohorts, and minorities, right? Everyone, and how progressive work that positively impacts culture, conversation, and responsible consumption is core to our brand creation model. And that was only a start for us. It continues now. What we are doing is we are bringing all our brands in India under a critical inclusion platform aimed at leading CPG India towards progressive work. And not just women. Our commitment is to bring under the fold of diversity, equity, and inclusion consumers who also identify themselves on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, persons with disability, ethnic diversity, age spectrum, so across spectrums. And brands like Johnny Walker, Black and White, Signature, these are some of the brands that are quite powerful in India from our portfolio. And they've led the way. And going forward, we want all our brands to feature amongst India's top brands in terms of inclusionary and equitable conversations and movements.
Incredible, Hina. And as you say, whilst we're talking today, our focus is, given it's International Women's Day or Week, is on women. I love that you're really breaking biases across multiple areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So thank you for that. And finally, Emma, let me come to you. What are your hopes for how Johnny Walker can really champion inclusion for women in whiskey? Perhaps share a little bit of your ambitions around that.
Yeah. So one of the things, it's been great listening to Adele and Hina. One of the things I agree with very strongly with Adele is it can be a challenge. If you don't see it, it can be difficult to imagine yourself being it. So I think the way that Johnny Walker are going, where we're working with a mix of creative people, from directors, creators, whiskey writers, ambassadors, but also within our own brand team. So looking at Johnny Walker being led by Julie Barman, this helps us be able to show it's a mix of people that are making, creating and enjoying Scotch whisky. So even down to our support of the men's and women's Scotland rugby teams, working with them and Johnny Walker is a great way of us being able to show that we're breaking down those biases and changing how we look at whisky. One of the great ways that we also do that at the minute is through Johnny Walker Princess Street. So a big part of Johnny Walker Princess Street, as you go in through the introduction, is we are breaking the biases. So we're trying to break the biases on who drinks whiskey, where do they drink it, how do they drink it. And I think that's a great way for us to be able to show that it can be drank by a mix of different people. It's been created for everyone to enjoy.
So look, as we've heard from our panellists so far, progress is being made. And we all have a role to play to ensure that continues. And that feels particularly important now as we emerge from the pandemic, with studies showing the impact that is having on gender equality. So given all of that, I'm going to go to each of the panelists now for a view on what form of gender bias really is concerning you the most right now, and what would you like to see happen to break the bias in that area? So maybe, Hina, if I could come to you first.
So a couple of things, the belief that it is mainly the woman's responsibility to look after the home and family, and that even if she works, she can only do certain types of roles work because she's a woman. Right? I really would like to see that bias broken. And what I'd like to see happen is perhaps 2-3 things very quickly. One, for all women to step up to support each other, right? It is often said that women don't help other women. But if each one of us took the pledge to help at least one more woman break the bias, this could really set off a nuclear reaction of change. Right? The second thing I would say is, I wish all men could become clones of my husband. And I know, Louise, your husband's like that. I mean, he's pushed me, he's challenged me, he's helped with the kids, he's reshaped his career. And, if all men can make this very personal to themselves, think about their daughters and granddaughters and what, these girls will face if things don't change, then I think it can really create a revolution. And last but not the least, I would say if all businesses can become as committed to inclusion and diversity as Diageo is, right? As a company, we are absolutely committed to creating the most inclusive culture. And every business can make an impact. So, we are very determined. And I hope that many others can join us to break this bias.
Fantastic, Ina. I mean, it's, as you say, it's got to be a personal commitment, but then also organizations play their role, and definitely celebrating all the men out there that are playing a big part in really lifting the progress. So thanks for that. Let me come to you, Emma. Same question for you. Which aspect of bias is concerning you, and what would you like to see happen to break that?
A big part that always concerns me is the ongoing strength of some of the stereotypes. So that belief that, as Hina said, that certain roles are there for women to do, or women should be doing more of the work in the house, or carrying more of that mental load, the work that's done that isn't often noticed, where you're making sure everything is keeping on running in the background. So I think we're making good strides towards being able to break some of that within Diageo through things like the family leave for both men and women and others. And how we're looking to encourage people to get a work-life balance as well, I think is really helping. I would also echo what Hina said as well. We need support from everyone in order to break these biases. So from women, but also from strong men that are wanting to challenge this, but also want to be able to take their part in the journey. So again, I'm very lucky to have a great partner that helps me, pushes me, but also supports me at home as well as at work.
Fantastic, Emma. Thank you so much for that. And maybe Adele, finally for you, same question. What's concerning you? There are Diageo perspectives, but love to hear what your thoughts are on where you're concerned about bias and how we can break that.
I think the bias that I'm concerned about is really, locked to media in two perspectives. The first being on issues around sexual violence and how those stories are told. It's a big issue globally. It's one that the pandemic pushed further. And through the work that I do in terms of trying to get survivors of sexual violence access to psychological resources and therapy, what I've found is that even locally, how the media writes about sexual violence actually helps push it further. So there's a huge bias in trying to find fault in the survivor while trying to kind of sanitize perpetrators. And I think, more has to be done in terms of workshops with the media for them to really understand. And when I say that, I mean traditional media, for them to really understand the strength they have in shaping societies and in either erasing or reinforces certain biases or stereotypes that we have of women. So that's one. And the second one, still stemming from that point, is on all matters reported around women in the media, or all advertisements we see around that include women in the media. A lot of them kind of push the narrative that you're less than, or don't have much representation, and push a particular stereotype. And most of the times that stereotype is harmful. So I'd love to see a lot more representation, especially for African women or Black women or women of color, and also to see them not in the same spaces that still reinforce stereotypes. And I think the first step is to have real workshops with media practitioners and even organizations that do any engagements with the media, just so that we're intentional about breaking the bias.
That's a great point, Adele. Actually, we've an area that I think we need to do even more on is thinking about portrayal within the media and how that can both positively talk to the representation of women, but also how that can have a negative effect. And I think there's some great sort of insights there from all of you. We're getting a lot of questions actually coming through, so please keep those coming. And great to see how many of you are saying challenge accepted to break the bias. But actually, a couple of people are asking, what can we actually do? Let's get practical here for a moment. Sort of what advice would we give to both men and women that want to start confronting and tackling bias? So maybe, Emma, if I come to you first, what piece of advice would you give to somebody who really wants to play a bigger role in tackling bias?
I think it's probably try and be aware of what's happening around you. So if there's certain conversations, things that you've maybe heard said in the past, just think about the context. If you're hearing something said, how would you feel if there was a young woman that was, as a young woman, was hearing that maybe rules of certain people, and if you don't agree with it, just challenge it, try and stop it. Whether that's taking the person to one side, whether that's calling it out at the point in time, whatever works best for you, because you've always got to consider what the safety is, what are the different issues that are happening, but really just start to challenge, question, ask why people are saying things in certain ways.
Fantastic. I mean, I love that sort of empathy piece and sort of standing in their shoes, but then also having the difficult conversations. That's so important. Hina, what would you add to that? What practical advice would you give to somebody wanting to tackle bias?
I think it's similar to Emma. I mean, what I would say is that, whether you want to tackle bias or you're facing bias, right? If you really want to make a difference, take a stand, speak up against the bias, and showcase your belief, progressive thinking, attitude at every opportunity. I remember once, I was in a meeting and one gentleman turned around and said, this lady's gone on maternity leave. And, I think we should terminate her because I can't really live with this gap. And let's get someone else. And I remember I was not very senior, but I was pretty furious. And I sort of took him to the side and said, what if that was your wife or daughter? Right? And I don't think he ever forgot that. Right? So I feel that one should speak up. I feel I have not spoken enough every time I've seen a situation like that. But I would really encourage everyone to speak up so that we can create, awareness and change.
Absolutely, Hina. And I think we can all attest to that whilst there may have been times that we courageously took that step to give the feedback, there are also times that we probably regret not saying at the moment. So I think really sort of confronting in that moment. But as Emma said, finding that right moment, that right way. And I love the way you describe sort of really making it personal for people, because if we assume that there's not negative intent, but there could be some unintended bias, then how do we really make sure that we get the sort of breakthrough there? Adele, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that same question. Sort of any practical advice of what you think people could do more of to tackle bias?
I think it's to echo what everybody has said. It has to be something personal that you do, because the people who push these biases further belong to our families, they belong to our work groups, they're in our friend circles. So if we all commit today that we're going to call it out on that level, there will be impacts that we will have. I think most of the times we think that having a great change is somebody else's job to do, or maybe requires so much more that you possibly don't have. I think a great change is made up of small changes. And if we all do our part, then that great change will be actualized. But the second step, I think, is a call out to women as well, is on mentorship. So those of us who are privileged to break through the biases and enter certain offices or certain boardrooms, it will be powerful if we pull along 3 other women or 2 other women or 1 other woman with us, right? Or if we share the skills or the navigation that worked for us. I think mentorship is a huge, huge pillar in us breaking this bias, because we then pass on knowledge that can't be taught in classrooms to other women who then help us increase our numbers in the various spaces that we want to be in. So if you have the capacity to be able to mentor 1 woman, 2 women, 3 women, I would say make the commitment today to actually see that through.
Fantastic, Adele. Thank you all so much for those kind of rich thoughts. And and making it practical as well, because it does start with personal commitment to action as well. Well, I know we're coming towards the end of today's LinkedIn Live session. It's been fantastic to have Hina, Emma, and Adele joining us. I hope that for all of you watching, you found it as inspirational as I have. And I really want to thank the panel for taking time out to join us. Clearly, breaking the bias is something we will all continue to need to play our part in. And I really hope that today has left you with some inspiration, thoughts, and ideas of what more you can be doing. Certainly it has for me. And really, to close us out, I'd like to leave you with the voices of some of the brilliant women we have right across Diageo, each of whom have broken biases and are helping others to do so. So I'd love if we could play the final film, and thank you all for joining us today.
I broke the bias by becoming the first female record expert in Turkey.
Eu quebro o preconceito sendo a única mulher motorista no Brasil.
I broke the bias by becoming a world record holder with no rowing experience and low expectations from others.
I broke the bias by bringing my whole self to work, understanding exactly what I bring to the table.
I've broken the bias by showing that you can be a mother, you can be an engineer, and you can be a leader.
I broke the bias of people judging me for the way I look to become a senior liquid scientist for APAC.
I have broken the bias and become a master distiller and was part of the first all-female management team at Talisker Distillery.
Women in STEM often face a variety of bias and challenges.
I remember walking into that room and, seeing a room full of, amazing, very talented people with loads of experience in the industry that were all male.
I have come across a lot of, rejection in the early days.
Feeling like I wasn't being heard.
I didn't feel like I belonged in that room.
You can do whatever you put your mind to and don't actually listen to anyone else.
Women don't need to shout louder, mimic men, or pretend to be hardcore, in order to get ahead.
It doesn't matter who are you and from where you have come in.
You are as good as anybody else, and nobody should ever tell you that you're too young, too female, too anything to do something that you've set your heart to.
Não tenha medo. Enfrente. Mostre que é diferente.
I think there's something really motivating about sticking out.
I am in the room because I deserve to be in the room.
Toda mulher tem capacidade para isso. Toda mulher tem que escolher seu destino.
Society is equal now, and you shouldn't judge me based on my gender, right?
One way that I challenge bias is to surround myself by people that inspire me.
Don't ever be afraid to speak your mind, to voice your opinions, and connect.
You can be an advocate for both yourself and for others.
The bigger the challenge, the more confident I am that I can do it. We never believed that we could actually get the world record or that we'd do as well as we did, but we believed that we could do it.
I've broken the bias. Will you?
I have broken the bias.
Will you?
I have broken the bias.
Will you?
I've broken the bias.
Will you?
I've broken the bias.
Will you?
Eu quebro o preconceito. E você?